Hello everyone, and welcome to World War II at 80. I'm Ron May, your host, author, historian, and speaker on World War II history and the stories of those who served. We continue with our 14th episode today, focusing on the events and stories of February 1945. February began with key battles on the island of Luzon in the Philippines. On February 1st, the U.S. 38th Army Division, which had landed on Luzon on January 9th, engaged Japanese forces at the Battle of Zigzag Pass. The pass, today known as the Dalton or Balit Pass, was a curvy road passing between the Caraballo Sur and Sierra Madre mountain ranges in central Luzon. The Japanese army had dug in along the pass with well-disguised foxholes, tunnels, and trenches. Note the map on the right with the position of trenches, heavy weapons, and fortifications along the pass. One person described the pass as follows: few pieces of ground combined to the same degree to roughness and dense jungle. The main road twists violently through the pass. The jungle flora in the region is so thick that one can step 5 yards off the highway and not be able to see the road. The Japanese had honeycombed every hill and knoll at the zigzag with foxholes linked by tunnels or trenches. At particularly advantageous points, they had strong points centered on log or dirt pillboxes. All the defenses were well camouflaged, for rich jungle foliage covered most positions. It took 8 days of intense battle before the 38th Division pushed out the enemy and secured the pass. Testifying to the ferocity of the struggle, the division killed about 2,400 of the 2,800-man Japanese force, while taking only 25 prisoners. Paragon, Indiana native Harvey E. Baston, Jr. was caught in the thick of the battle. An Army medic and litter-bearer, Baston served with the 113th Medical Battalion, which was assigned to the 38th Division. Serving on a litter squad with Company C, his squad saw a wounded soldier in a field during the middle of combat. When they went out after him, they encountered enemy machine gun fire from Japanese forces. The litter bearers were forced to hit the ground. From their prone position, they courageously inched forward to the wounded man and put him on the litter, doing their best to protect him. For the next 90 minutes, they remained trapped flat on the ground as enemy bullets whizzed over their heads. Finally, they were able to withdraw from their position and take the wounded man to the battalion aid station. American forces entered the Philippine capital city of Manila on February 3rd. Known affectionately as the Pearl of the Orient, Manila was a modern city and a wonder. But it soon became a place of complete devastation. The intense battle against Japanese forces lasted for a month and brought destruction to much of the city. Over 16,000 Japanese soldiers died in the conflict. 1,010 Americans lost their lives, and over 5,000 were wounded. Tragically, over 100,000 Filipino civilians were killed, the victims of either mass murder by the Japanese or bombing by U.S. forces. The only redemptive outcome of the battle was the liberation of the city from over 3 years of Japanese military occupation. Manila was considered one of the most horrific urban battles of World War II. Martinsville, Indiana native Byron E. Wilson saw the destruction of Manila from overhead as he flew on C-47 transport planes, serving as a crew chief, bringing much-needed supplies to the American and Philippine forces and the civilian population. The photo on the right shows a C-47 spraying DDT insecticide to control mosquitoes and the malaria they carried over the bombed areas in Manila, Philippines. Meanwhile, from the European theater, combat operations in Germany intensified in February. Dresden became one of the targets for the Allies. The city was in eastern Germany, near the border of Poland and the former Czech Republic. It was firebombed on February 13th and 14th. In 4 raids between 13 and 15 February of 1945, 772 heavy bombers of the Royal Air Force and 527 of the heavy bombers of the United States Army Air Forces dropped more than 3,900 tons of high explosive bombs and incendiary devices on the city. The once beautiful metropolis, shown on the left, was reduced to rubbish and shelled out buildings, as shown on the right. 90% of the city, which was inhabited by 600,000 people, was destroyed. The bombing was later controversial, as the city had no significant military presence. Its value as a target was not a military presence, but that the city was a hub for both transportation and industry, both used for the war effort. Indianapolis native and future author Kurt Vonnegut was on the scene for the destruction in Dresden. A student at Cornell University, he withdrew from college in January 1943 and enlisted in the Army. Captured by the Germans during the Battle of the Bulge in December 1944, Vonnegut was interned in Dresden as a POW. When the bombs from U.S. planes started falling, Vonnegut took shelter in the meat locker of the slaughterhouse where he was being confined. He survived the onslaught and later translated his experience of Dresden's destruction in his novel Slaughterhouse 5, published in 1969. The book catapulted him to fame. The second half of February began with U.S. Marines landing on the island of Iwo Jima on February 19th. The location of the island is shown in the center of the map by the yellow arrow. The volcanic island, located 750 miles south of Tokyo, Japan, was a strategic location because of the airfields that could be used for U.S. fighter planes to escort B-29 bombers flying from the island of Tinian to bomb Japan. The island, roughly shaped from one angle like a dog's head with a long snout, was 5 miles long and anywhere from 800 yards to 2.5 miles wide, covering 11 square miles. At the southwesternmost tip of the island was Mount Suribachi. A dormant volcano, it rises 550 feet high from the surf of the Pacific Ocean. It became the scene for the most famous photograph of World War II. Iwo Jima was heavily fortified by 21,000 Japanese forces, which were well concealed in an extensive system of bunkers with hidden artillery. The Japanese anticipated the Allied landing and fought ferociously to defend the island. The battle for Iwo Jima involved the U.S. 5th Amphibious Corps, the 5th Fleet of the Navy, and the 7th Air Force, and it lasted for 5 weeks. The majority of the American forces were made up of Marines from the 3rd, 4th, and 5th Divisions. While they secured a victory, it came at the highest cost. Close to 7,000 Americans lost their lives, and over 19,000 were wounded, compared to 18,000 plus Japanese killed and only 1,083 taken prisoner. This was the only Pacific battle of World War II that resulted in a higher ratio of American to Japanese casualties. There were almost 3 American casualties to every 2 Japanese casualties. About 3,000 Japanese held out in caves on the island until after the battle, when they were eventually killed or died of injury or starvation. Preparations for the amphibious landing of forces took place months earlier with aerial bombing. Starting on June 15, 1944, the U.S. Navy and the U.S. Army Air Forces began 9 months of shore bombardment and air raids against Iwo Jima, which would become the longest and most intense preliminary bombardments in the Pacific Theater. The battleship USS Indiana and many other Navy ships shelled Iwo Jima on January 24, 1945, in preparation for the invasion of the island, which took place 1 month later. A few days before the landing forces arrived, underwater operations took place on the island. Martinsville, Indiana native William D. Bennett was in the water near the shore of Iwo Jima 2 days before the amphibious invasion. Bennett was a machinist mate, 3rd class, serving with the Navy's Underwater Demolition Team, the precursor to today's Navy SEALs. On February 15th, 2 days before the Marines landed, he and the other members of his underwater demolition team spent 48 hours setting up explosives and searchlights at the approach near Mount Suribachi. The lights proved helpful as navigation aids when the Marines stormed the beaches, and the explosives protected the forces from a possible water-flanking maneuver by the enemy. U.S. forces numbering 60,000 men came ashore on February 19th. Edgar Hovius of Martinsville, Indiana, helped protect landing forces on board a Coast Guard manned LST landing ship tank. His ship was one of the first of the amphibious craft to come ashore on Iwo Jima, and then made repeated runs to the shoreline with men and equipment. The 3rd class gunner's mate was responsible for operating the anti-aircraft guns on the ship. "The Jap planes were all over the place," he said in an article from his hometown newspaper. "Their mortar fire, as usual, was one of their most potent weapons." He continued, "An LST can throw up plenty of flak, and we did, continuously. It seemed as though a plane could not possibly get through it. Yet they did." End of quote. Landing on the ashen beach of Iwo Jima on February 19th was Indiana native Wayne Saucerman, a Marine assigned to the 4th Division. Saucerman shared of his landing experience in an interview when he said, "Water splashed up as enemy mortars were landing on either side of our LCP, that is, landing craft personnel. When his group finally made it to the shore, they scampered out of their landing craft and then ascended 3 terraces under a barrage of small arm fire. They did the best they could to set up a defensive perimeter as the Japanese kept firing at them. The soft sand proved a menace as the Marines tried to dig foxholes with their helmets, only to have most of the sand cave into the hole they had just dug." Saucerman recalled of their efforts to survive the first 24 hours, "The first night was touch and go." Saucerman, shown sitting on far right, was a BAR machine gunner with a scout and sniper platoon. A few days after landing, Saucerman's platoon of 30 was called up to the front line. He said in his interview, "Only 10 of us made it back to the perimeter after that operation." Soon, the 10 were reduced to 5. On one occasion, Saucerman found a Japanese soldier inside a hole. Thinking the man was dead, he sought cover in the same hole. The enemy soldier was, however, still alive. The Japanese soldier tried to detonate a grenade to kill them both, but Saucerman was able to dispose of him. Photos that included Saucerman, shown in the upper left with a handwritten name and arrow, later appeared in a March 1945 issue of Life magazine. Kermit Davis, who was originally from Ohio but later moved to Indiana, served with the Marine 3rd Division as a rifleman and company runner on Iwo Jima. He was wounded in the neck on February 28th by the shrapnel from a Japanese hand grenade. Davis received a Purple Heart and then spent the next 20 years digging out small parts of the grenade left in his neck. While there were many close calls for Davis and his fellow Marines, there were also a few light moments of humor. On one occasion, cases of canned peaches that were stacked just outside of Davis's foxhole were blown apart by the shells of Japanese artillery. The can's contents were scattered over the men. "We didn't know what it was," remarked Davis in an interview. "At first, we thought we'd been splattered with flesh and blood from someone being hit. It turned out it was just the peaches and juice that showered us." There was no mistake in interpreting the event that took place on February 23rd, when 5 Marines and 1 Navy corpsman climbed up Mount Suribachi and planted a second U.S. flag on the peak. The first flag had been taken down, as shown in the photo at left. Capturing the moment of the second flag raising on film was AP photographer Joe Rosenthal. His photo became the most iconic image of World War II. Of the 6 men who raised the flag, 3 would later be killed in action, and 1 would drink himself to death. Here is a photo of the 3 flag raisers who survived the war. The one on the far right, Ira Hayes, later died from drinking in January 1954, barely 2 months after witnessing the unveiling of the Marine Corps Memorial. The memorial was a recreation of the photo taken by Rosenthal. The massive structure was erected across the Potomac River from Washington, D.C. in Arlington, Virginia, not far from the Arlington National Cemetery. 70 years later, it remains one of the most visited memorials in the Washington, D.C. area. On the same day as the flag raising on Suribachi, Marines were pushing further across the island, but there were plenty of obstacles. Herschel Woody Williams from West Virginia served as a flamethrower with the 3rd Marines on Iwo Jima. On February 23rd, he single-handedly took out 6 different Japanese concrete pillboxes by courageously approaching each of them and firing his flamethrower into the openings, killing the men inside of them. Months later, on October 5, 1945, Williams received the Medal of Honor from President Harry Truman for his courageous service on Iwo Jima. Williams spent the latter years of his life working to ensure that memorials to Gold Star families, those that have lost a loved one in war, would be built in every state of the country. Williams died in June of 2022 at the age of 98. He was the last living Medal of Honor recipient from World War II. Martinsville, Indiana native William K. Bill Hastings recalled seeing the planted American flag flapping on Suribachi from afar. A Marine PFC radio mechanic, he was serving with an amphibious tank battalion on Iwo Jima. Although the flag planting was inspiring to all, there was still plenty of combat ahead. Just 3 days after the historic flag raising, on February 26, Harlan E. Bud Grow of Martinsville, a Marine in the 4th Division, was caught in a melee of enemy fire. While his squad retreated to a better position, Grow noticed some wounded Marines in the distance. Realizing that the men would either die from their wounds or be killed, Corporal Grow braved the enemy fire to save one wounded man. Fully aware of his own peril, he crawled over 100 yards to reach the wounded Marine. Grow successfully brought the Marine casualty back to the safety of American lines. For his courageous act, he was awarded the Bronze Star. Wayne Saucerman recalled that every Marine on the island served as a stretcher bearer at different times. It was indeed hazardous duty to collect the dead and wounded, as the firing from the Japanese continued. There wasn't a safe place anywhere on the beach, said Saucerman. Dead Marines were buried in a trench 36 inches from chest to chest and 6 feet deep, with a poncho covering each of them. A few weeks later, on March 15th, Wayne Saucerman was hit by 3 bullets while scouting for the enemy on a ridge. A Japanese rifleman finally located his position and emptied 3 bullets into his body. 1 bullet hit him in the right hand and 2 in the right leg, leaving him with a compound fracture. Saucerman's war was over, but his battle for healing had just begun. He carried 1 lodged bullet in his leg for the rest of his life. Saucerman lived a long life and died in May 2023 at the age of 97. The battle for Iwo Jima ended in a U.S. victory on March 26th, after 5 weeks of terrible combat. Just 5 days before the end of battle on Iwo Jima, on March 21st, Indiana native Joe Stockton, shown on left, wrote a reflective letter to his fiancée Mary. He was sitting on a hill overlooking the beach with 100 ships on the water. He wrote in his letter to Mary, quote, "When you think what this island cost in human lives and material, this is an ugly place. But erase this from your mind, and it is beautiful here." Stockton had the right perspective. Victory was both beautiful and costly on Iwo Jima. The island of Iwo Jima was occupied by the U.S. military after Japan surrendered. It was returned to Japan in 1968. Today, the island, which is mostly uninhabited, is owned by Japan and is called Iwo-to. There is a memorial there to U.S. forces that fought for the island. Once a year, at the commemoration of the battle, the Japanese government allows people to visit. Learn more about World War II history during 1945 and the stories of those who served in my World War II trilogy, Our Service, Our Stories, Volumes 1, 2, and 3. The books are available for purchase on my website, ronaldpmay.com. To contact me for questions or to schedule me for a speaking engagement, email me at ron@ronaldpmay.com. Also, be sure to check out all my other videos on my YouTube channel at World War II History and Stories with Ron May. You will find a link to my videos on the YouTube tab from the homepage of my website. Please consider liking and subscribing to my channel. Thanks for tuning into this episode. Please share it with others who you think may be interested. See you next month for our episode 15 featuring the events and stories of March 1945 on World War II at 80.